Isaac Ingalls Stevens was the first governor of Washington Territory, serving 1853 to 1857. He also served as a U.S. congressman, and a brigadier general in the Union Army during the American Civil War until his death at the Battle of Chantilly. He was appointed posthumously to the grade of Major General of Volunteers. Early life. Stevens was born and raised in Massachusetts, leaving his home state for the United States Military Academy at West Point in the late 1830s. He graduated in 1839, at the top of his class, and served for a number of years with the Army Corps of Engineers. He was promoted to first lieutenant in 1840. Stevens was the adjutant of the Corps of Engineers during the Mexican-American War, seeing action at the Siege of Veracruz and at Cerro Gordo, Contreras, and Churubusco. In the latter fight, he caught the attention of his superiors, who rewarded him with the brevet rank of captain. He was again cited and brevetted for gallantry at the Battle of Chapultepec, this time to the rank of major. He participated in combat at Molino del Rey, and the Battle for Mexico City, where he was severely wounded. He later wrote a book on his adventures, Campaigns of the Rio Grande and Mexico, with notices of the recent work of Major Ripley. He superintended fortifications on the New England coast from 1841 until 1849. He was given command of the Coast Survey Office in Washington, D.C., serving in that role until March 1853. Governor. Having been a firm supporter of Franklin Pierce's candidacy for President of the United States in 1852, Stevens was rewarded by President Pierce on March 17, 1853 by being named governor of the newly created Washington Territory. Stevens chose to add one more duty as he traveled west to the territory he would govern. The government was calling for a surveyor to map an appropriate railroad route across the northern United States. With Stevens' engineering experience, he won the bid, and spent most of 1853 moving slowly across the prairie, surveying his way to Washington Territory. Meeting up with George McClellan's party that had surveyed the line between the Puget Sound and the Spokane River. He took up his post at Olympia as governor in November that year. As a result of his expedition, Stevens wrote a third book, Report of Explorations for a Route for the Pacific Railroad near the 47th and 49th parallels of north latitude, from St. Paul, Minnesota, to Puget Sound. Stevens was a controversial governor in his time. Historians consider him even more controversial for his role in compelling the Native American tribes of Washington Territory by intimidation and force to sign treaties that ceded most of their lands and rights to Stevens' government. These included the Treaty of Medicine Creek, Treaty of Hell Gate, Treaty of Near Bay, Treaty of Point Elliott, Point No Point Treaty, and Quinault Treaty. When Stevens was met with resistance, he used the troops at his disposal to exact vengeance. His winter campaign against the Yakama tribe, led by Chief Kamiakin, and his execution of the Nisqually chieftain Leski, among other deeds, led a number of powerful citizens in the territory to beg President Pierce to remove Stevens. Territorial Judge Edward Lander and Ezra Meeker were both vocal in opposing Stevens. Lander was arrested as a result, and Meeker was simply ignored. Pierce sent word to Stevens of his disapproval of the governor's conduct, but refused to remove his appointee. Opponents of Stevens ultimately lost public support, as the majority of the citizens of Washington Territory considered the governor to be on the side of white settlers and Meeker to be overly concerned with the Indians. As a result of this public perception, Stevens was popular enough to be elected the territory's delegate to the United States Congress in 1857 and 1858. The tensions between the whites and the Native Americans would be left for others to resolve. Stevens is often charged with responsibility for the later conflicts in eastern Washington and Idaho, especially the war fought by the United States against Chief Joseph and the Nez Perce. But these events were decades away when Isaac Stevens left Washington state for good in 1857. Footnote: Stevens' party included Drive, George Sutley, John Mellon and Fred Burr, son of David H. Burr. Civil War. When the Civil War began in 1861, following the Union defeat at the First Battle of Bull Run, Stevens was commissioned in the Army again. He was appointed as colonel of the 79th New York Volunteers, known as the Cameron Highlanders. He became a brigadier general on September 28, 1861, and fought at Port Royal. He led the 2nd Brigade of the Expeditionary Forces sent to attack the Sea Islands off the coast of South Carolina. He led a division at the Battle of Secessionville, where he personally led an attack on Fort Lamar in which 25% of his men were casualties. Stevens was transferred with his 9th Corps Division to Virginia to serve under Major General John Pope in the Northern Virginia Campaign and the Second Battle of Bull Run. He was killed in action at the Battle of Chantilly on September 1, 1862, after picking up the fallen regimental colors of his old regiment, shouting, "Highlanders, my Highlanders, follow your general," charging with his troops while carrying the banner of St. Andrew's Cross. Stevens was struck in the temple by a bullet and died instantly. He was buried in Newport, Rhode Island at Island Cemetery. In March 1863, he was posthumously promoted to Major General, backdated to July 18, 1862. Hazard Stevens, Isaac's son, was also injured in the Battle of Chantilly. He rose to become a general in the U.S. Army and an author. Together with P. B. Van Trump, he participated in the first documented ascent of Mount Rainier. Memorialization. A small monument in Ox Hill Battlefield Park commemorates the death of Stevens. Stevens County, Washington, and Stevens County, Minnesota, were both named in his honor. 2 U.S. Army forts were named for Stevens: Fort Stevens in the Union defenses of Washington, D.C. and Fort Stevens in Oregon. The latter was active from 1863 until 1947 to protect the mouth of the Columbia River. The Isaac Stevens Camp No. 1, Washington State Camp of the Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War, is named in his honor. Stevens Hall on the campus of Washington State University was named for him. The city of Lake Stevens, Washington, and Lake Stevens is named for him. The town of Stevensville, Montana, is named for him. Isaac Stevens Middle School in Pasco, Washington, and Isaac I. Stevens Elementary School in Seattle, Washington, are named after him. Stevens Peak and Upper and Lower Stevens Lake in northern Idaho were named after him by Captain John Mullen. But Stevens Pass in the Cascade Mountains of Washington on U.S. Highway 2 is named after John Frank Stevens, a locating engineer for the Great Northern Railway.